Welcome, dear listeners, to an unforgettable journey. Prepare your hearts for a narrative that transcends time, a story of courage, sacrifice, and love that echoes from the millenary stones of Jerusalem to our days. In just a few minutes, we will dive into the extraordinary destiny of a young man who carried the future of humanity in his hands, discovering that true power does not reside in mystical gifts, but in the strength of the human heart. Before we begin this epic adventure, tell me in the comments, from which city are you joining us? I love knowing that our community spreads to every corner. And don't forget, leave that like to strengthen our literary family and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the upcoming narratives that promise to touch your souls. Munisimsak year 1187, Jerusalem, Holy Land. In times when three faiths disputed the most sacred city in the world, molten bronze flowed through the forged channels like golden tears in the darkness of Jerusalem. Matthias of Acre shaped the metal with hands that knew every whim of fire, every sigh of the furnace that for 20 years had warmed his small world of iron and hope. Dawn whispered promises through the wooden cracks of the workshop, carrying the aroma of jasmine from distant gardens and the muffled echo of prayers rising from the mosques, churches, and synagogues of the holy city. His fingers, hardened by work but still capable of delicacy, polished the blade of a sword destined for a Templar knight. Each hammer blow echoed like a heart beating in silence, creating ancestral music that his blacksmith ancestors had sung through the centuries. Matthias did not know that this would be the last dawn of his simple life, the last time metal would obey docilely to his will without carrying the weight of a greater destiny. The workshop door burst open with violence that made the forge flames dance like frightened serpents. A man staggered inside, his Templar armor stained with blood and dust, blue eyes burning with an urgency that transcended the pain of the wounds that marked him. Sir Godwin, a knight Matthias knew only by sight, carried in his arms a burden more precious than any treasure, a boy of fragile appearance, unconscious, whose brown hair shone in the forge light like threads of ancient gold. Matthias! The Templar's voice was a hoarse whisper, each word costing him superhuman effort. This boy carries the destiny of the Holy Land in his veins. The blacksmith's hands trembled when they received the boy's warm body. There was something in the touch of that young skin that made his palms tingle, as if an invisible electric current ran through the boy's arms. On the smooth forehead, a strange mark pulsed with very subtle golden light, almost imperceptible, beating to the same rhythm as a serene heart. Sir Godwin extended a fragmented map, its edges burned and stained, along with a golden amulet that radiated its own warmth. Protect him until he awakens his gift, Matthias. When he turns 18, the knight choked, his eyes glazing like frozen lakes. When he turns 18, he will be the key to a peace that our children can barely dream of. The Templar's body collapsed on the workshop stones with a muffled sound that seemed to echo through the corridors of time. Matthias knelt beside Sir Godwin, feeling the warrior's last breath escape like a silent prayer. The blacksmith looked at the boy in his arms. David, the knight murmured before departing, and understood that his life had just divided in two, the before and after of that sacred moment. The mark on the boy's forehead pulsed more intensely, as if responding to Matthias's gentle touch. For an instant, the blacksmith had the strange sensation that he could hear the boy's thoughts, fragmented images of green fields, of a sweet-eyed sister named Sarah, of a mother who sang lullabies in an ancient tongue. David was not just a common child. There was in him a power that Matthias did not understand, but that he recognized instinctively, as a blacksmith recognizes the quality of metal by the sound it produces when struck. How could a simple blacksmith protect a boy who carried the destiny of all the Holy Land? 3 days passed like leaves carried by autumn wind. David awakened to the sound of Matthias's hammer, his green eyes opening slowly, like flowers blooming at the first ray of sun. The boy sat on the improvised bed of straw and soft fabrics, his expression revealing the confusion of one who awakens from a deep dream without remembering where he began to sleep. Where am I? David's voice was melodious, charged with a maturity that contrasted with his youthful features. Matthias approached with the delicacy of one handling fragile crystal. In my workshop, boy, you are safe. He offered the boy a chalice of fresh water, observing with amazement how David's fingers seemed to recognize the purity of the liquid before even touching it. The boy drank thirstily, but his eyes wandered through the workshop with strange familiarity. He walked to the extinguished forge and extended his hand over the cold ashes. To Matthias's astonishment, the embers began to glow again, without fuel, without flame, merely responding to the boy's mysterious presence. "I don't remember anything," David whispered, but his hands moved with ancestral knowledge, touching the tools as if they were extensions of himself. When his fingers brushed the blade that Matthias had forged, the metal vibrated with a crystalline sound and bathed itself in golden light, a light that did not blind, but warmed like a maternal embrace. The blacksmith stepped back, his heart galloping like a wild horse. "What kind of child are you, David?" Before the boy could answer, the sound of heavy boots echoed on the street stones. Harsh voices shouted in Arabic, searching for the boy of prophecy. Matthias grabbed David by the hand, feeling again that electric current that seemed to connect them, and the two hid behind the furnace while Saracen soldiers invaded the workshop. "We know he's here," roared the leader, a man with a black beard and cruel eyes. "The boy who makes metal sing. Hand him over, and you shall live." Matthias and David exchanged silent glances. There was mutual understanding in that moment, as if they were father and son united by bonds deeper than blood. The blacksmith indicated a secret passage that led to the city's underground tunnels, paths he had known since childhood. While fleeing through the humid darkness of the stone corridors, David whispered, "Matthias, I can feel things. Pure water leagues away, metals that cry from loneliness, hearts that bleed in silence." His words echoed on the ancestral walls. "And I can feel that you have a secret too. You're not just a blacksmith, are you?" The footsteps of the pursuers were approaching, but Matthias stopped for an instant, looking into the boy's green eyes. Memory fragments began to stir in his mind like autumn leaves, images of distant castles, of a blonde child being taken away in the middle of the night, of a name he had forced himself to forget, Matthias de Montfort. "Perhaps not," admitted the blacksmith, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Perhaps we are both more than we appear, David. What secrets from the past were about to transform a common blacksmith into the protector of a sacred destiny?" The Christian village of Bethany received the two fugitives as it embraced all pilgrims, with initial distrust that melted in the warmth of hospitality. Matthias and David found refuge in the small church, where candles flickered like terrestrial stars and incense carried whispered prayers to the heavens. Sister Miriam appeared when they least expected, as if she had materialized from the very shadows of the altar. She was a middle-aged woman, dark hair hidden under the religious veil, but there was in her brown eyes an intensity that revealed much more than simple devotion. Her hands, when greeting David, were calloused not only by prayer, but by the handling of weapons. "You have been expected for a long time," she said, her voice carrying echoes of ancient authority. "I am from the secret order of the Grail Guardians, David, and you are the last direct descendant of Joseph of Arimathea." The nun's words floated in the church air like sacred incense. David felt a shiver run down his spine, as if recognizing a truth that his conscious mind could not process. Matthias observed in silence, seeing how the boy seemed to grow a few centimeters just by hearing those words. Sister Miriam led them to a secret room behind the altar, where ancient maps covered the stone walls and leather-bound books guarded centuries of secrets. "Your lineage, David, carries the gift of locating the Holy Grail, but only when you turn 18. Until then, you are vulnerable to those who want to use your power for dark purposes." "What purposes?" asked Matthias, his voice betraying a paternal protection he himself did not completely understand. The nun's eyes darkened like storm sky. "Saladin knows the prophecy. He sent Al-Hakim, the soul hunter, to capture David. Al-Hakim is not just a common warrior. He also possesses blood of the sacred lineage, but chose to serve darkness instead of light." David approached one of the maps, his fingers tracing routes that seemed familiar. "What if I surrender? If that brings peace?" "No!" Matthias's voice echoed with surprising force. "A father does not deliver his son to the abyss, even if the whole world is in flames." The silence that followed was charged with revelation. Matthias had called David son, and both felt the truth of those words resonate in their hearts like bronze bell. Sister Miriam smiled subtly. "There is more, Matthias de Montfort," she said, and the blacksmith froze upon hearing his true name. "You are also not who you think you are. Templar blood runs in your veins. You are the bastard son of a grandmaster, sent to the Holy Land as a baby to protect you from political conspiracies." The memories that Matthias had buried deeply began to emerge like underground springs, fragments of a childhood in cold castles, of sword training he attributed to dreams, of a constant sensation of not completely belonging to the simple world of the forge. David approached Matthias, and for the first time touched his hand with filial gesture. "It doesn't matter what blood runs in our veins, Matthias. What matters is what we choose to do with our hearts." Sister Miriam watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "That's why you were united by destiny. David will need all your strength, Matthias, because Al-Hakim approaches, and when he arrives..." A distant cry cut through the night air, followed by the sound of galloping hooves. The entire village awakened in panic. Was that the arrival of the fearsome soul hunter? Flames licked the night sky of Bethany like tongues of hungry demons. Hooded mercenaries surrounded the village, their torches transforming rural peace into a nightmare of war. Matthias held David against himself, feeling the boy's body tremble not with fear, but with growing energy that seemed to want to explode from his pores. "Hand over the boy and the village will be spared." Al-Hakim's voice echoed like thunder among the humble houses. The soul hunter rode a black horse that seemed made of condensed shadows, his eyes shining with a light that was not entirely human. Sister Miriam wielded a sword with skill that would make any knight envious. "David, you need to control your powers. If you explode now, you might destroy both enemies and innocents." The boy breathed with difficulty, his hands beginning to radiate that golden light Matthias had witnessed in the forge. The mark on his forehead pulsed more and more intensely, as if responding to Al-Hakim's proximity. I don't know how it's like trying to hold a river with bare hands." Matthias knelt before David, his calloused hands enveloping the young face. "Look at me, son. Breathe with me. You are not alone in this fight." There was infinite tenderness in his voice, a patience that came from love born not of blood, but of the deliberate choice to protect. The mercenaries invaded the central square, setting fire to houses where entire families hid. The desperation in the children's screams was the spark David needed. His compassion transformed into pure power, and he rose with eyes shining like small suns. "No." David extended his hands, and a golden light barrier rose around the village, repelling the attackers like an invisible shield. The mercenaries were thrown far away, their weapons disintegrating into dust, their horses fleeing in terror. But the effort was devastating for the boy. David collapsed in Matthias's arms, his body convulsing, blood flowing from his lips like red petals. The barrier had saved hundreds of lives, but nearly cost the life of the protector himself. Al-Hakim watched from the distance, his eyes fixed on David with a mixture of respect and fury. "Impressive, young guardian, but this was only the beginning. Next time, there will be no mercy." While Matthias carried David into the church, the boy murmured words that made the blacksmith's heart tighten. "Father, I call you father because you chose to love me, not because you had obligation." Sister Miriam applied healing ointments to the unconscious boy, her tears dripping onto the bandages. "He's growing too fast, Matthias. His powers awaken before time because of constant danger. If this continues..." "He will not die," said Matthias with determination that came from the depths of his soul. "I swear by my father's forge and by my blood sword, he will not die while I breathe." But memory fragments began to bombard Matthias's mind, images of Templar castles, of secret ceremonies, of a destiny he had abandoned to live a simple life. Perhaps it was time to recover who he really was. Could the love of a substitute father be strong enough to protect a divine destiny? David regained consciousness 3 days later, when the morning sun painted colorful stained glass on the church walls. His green eyes shone with new wisdom, as if the previous trial had accelerated not only his powers, but also his understanding of the world. Matthias slept in a chair beside the improvised bed, one hand always touching the boy's shoulder, even in sleep. Sister Miriam entered carrying hot bread and goat milk, but also something much more precious, knowledge that would change everything. "David, the map that Sir Godwin left you is only 1/3 of the way to the Holy Grail." The boy sat slowly, accepting the food with silent gratitude. "Where are the other fragments?" "Robert, the last Templar, guards a piece in Antioch. He was Matthias's mentor in his youth, before your adoptive father decided to abandon the order." Miriam looked at the sleeping blacksmith with tenderness. "The third fragment is with Eleazar, the Jewish sage, but he was captured and taken to Damascus." David gently touched Matthias's shoulder, awakening him with filial affection. "Father, we need to leave. The journey awaits us." Matthias opened his eyes and saw in David's face a determination that wasn't there before. The boy had grown during those days of unconsciousness, not in stature but in purpose. "Wherever you go, I go, my son." The journey to Antioch would be dangerous, crossing territories disputed by Christians and Muslims. Sister Miriam accompanied them, revealing knowledge of every secret trail, every safe hideout. During nights around campfires, she told stories of the Order of Grail Guardians, of men and women who dedicated entire lives to protecting sacred objects. "Why do you trust us so much?" David asked on one of those nights, observing how the stars seemed to form celestial maps. "Because there is a purity in your heart, David, that cannot be feigned or corrupted. And because Matthias loves you with a love that transcends blood, and that kind of love is sacred. But betrayal came when they least expected it. The guide Miriam had hired in the last village led them directly into an ambush. Al-Hakim waited for them in a rocky gorge, accompanied by a dozen silent warriors. "Thank you for sparing me the work of searching for you," said the soul hunter, his voice echoing among the stones like serpents' whisper. "Now we shall see what the young guardian is truly capable of." It was then that David perceived something disturbing. Al-Hakim did not radiate only evil. There was in him a deep sadness, a pain that mirrored the very luminous mark on David's forehead. You also have the mark," the boy whispered. Al-Hakim smiled bitterly, removing his turban and revealing a crescent moon-shaped scar on his forehead. "We are cousins in blood, young guardian, both descendants of the same sacred lineage. The difference is that I chose to use my gifts for revenge, not for peace." Matthias positioned himself in front of David, his hand instinctively finding the hilt of the sword he hadn't wielded for decades. "No one will touch my son while I live." "How touching," murmured Al-Hakim. "A renegade Templar protecting the last guardian. But you do not understand. I did not come to kill him. I came to show him the truth about what awaits him." What terrible truth did Al-Hakim intend to reveal about David's destiny? The dungeons of Damascus smelled of dead hope and shattered dreams. David found himself chained in a damp stone cell, but his chains were made of a special metal that suppressed his powers, leaving him vulnerable like any common 12-year-old boy. Matthias and Sister Miriam had been separated from him, taken to distant cells, where their cries of concern echoed like ghostly laments. Al-Hakim entered the cell, carrying a simple wooden chair, sitting before David with the pose of a teacher about to give a painful lesson. His eyes, which shone with dark power, also contained a deep melancholy that the boy recognized instinctively. "Do you want to know why I chose darkness, young guardian?" Al-Hakim's voice was surprisingly gentle, like a father telling bedtime stories. "Extend your hand. Touch me and see." David hesitated. During the previous days, he had discovered he could see memories through touch, a gift that connected him deeply with others' suffering. Touching Al-Hakim would mean experiencing all his pain. "Do not be afraid," whispered the soul hunter. "Truth may hurt, but lies hurt more." When David's fingers touched Al-Hakim's scarred skin, the world exploded in visions. He saw an Arab boy with bright eyes playing in perfumed gardens with his little sisters. He saw crusader knights invading his village, swords cutting innocent lives like sickles cut wheat. He saw the boy Al-Hakim had been kneeling over his family's bodies, swearing vengeance against all Christians. "They killed everyone," murmured Al-Hakim, tears streaming down his war-marked cheeks. "My mother, my sisters, my father, all in the name of the same God you serve. How can I choose peace when peace meant genocide for my family?" David felt tears spring from his own eyes. Al-Hakim's pain was real, deep, justified. But there was something more in the visions, a specific moment when young Al-Hakim had knelt before a dark altar, offering his soul in exchange for power sufficient to avenge his family. "I understand your pain," said David, his voice loaded with genuine compassion. "But revenge doesn't bring the dead back. It only creates more dead." Al-Hakim rose abruptly, his expression hardening again. Easy words from a boy who never lost anything. "I lost everything too," David replied softly. "I lost my memory, my original family, my normal childhood, but I gained something more precious, a father who chose me for love, not obligation." For a moment, something wavered in Al-Hakim's gaze. David seized that crack of light to do something no one had done for the soul hunter in decades, offered forgiveness. "I forgive you," said David, extending his chained hands. "I forgive your pain, your anger, your choices. You don't need to carry this darkness alone." The reaction was instantaneous. Al-Hakim recoiled as if struck, his chains of dark power trembling. For a few seconds, the scar on his forehead glowed with the same golden light that marked David. "No," whispered Al-Hakim, "I cannot. If I forgive, they will have died for nothing." "If you don't forgive," David replied gently, "you will die for nothing too." The soul hunter left the cell staggering, leaving David alone with a new certainty. The power of darkness was strong, but the power of forgiveness was stronger still. Would forgiveness be capable of breaking chains forged by decades of hatred? Eleazar, the Jewish sage, was an 80-year-old man whose blue eyes contained entire libraries of ancient knowledge. When Matthias and Sister Miriam managed to free him in a daring rescue operation, they found him in a cell adjacent to David's, murmuring prayers in archaic Hebrew that seemed to make the very stones of the dungeons vibrate with sacred power. The old sage embraced David as if embracing a grandson lost long ago. "Blessed child," he whispered, his tears dripping onto the boy's brown hair. "For 60 years I have waited for this moment." Gathered in a safe house on the outskirts of Damascus, the four sat around a dark wooden table, where Eleazar unrolled scrolls that seemed to have been written by angels themselves. The words in ancient Aramaic danced in the candlelight like living creatures. "The complete prophecy," said Eleazar, his voice charged with reverence, "speaks not only of the Holy Grail, but of 3 sacred chalices that must be united to bring true peace to the Holy Land." David leaned over the scrolls, feeling the words resonate in his soul like ancestral music. 3 chalices? The Holy Grail of Christ, yes, but also the chalice of Miriam, sister of Moses, which represents the Jewish faith, and the chalice of Aisha, wife of the Prophet, which symbolizes Islam. Eleazar's eyes shone with tears of hope. When Jerusalem bleeds under 3 moons, the guardian of pure heart will gather the 3 chalices and restore peace among the 3 faiths that worship the same God. Sister Miriam grabbed Matthias's arm, her face paling. "When Jerusalem bleeds under 3 moons, the 3rd full moon of this year will happen in 2 weeks. And there are rumors that Saladin is preparing the final siege of the city." But Eleazar had not yet finished. His trembling hands turned the final page of the scroll, revealing verses written in ink that seemed to have been made of tears and stars. To activate the 3 chalices and unite them in the Grail of Unity, the blood of the last guardian must be spilled upon them. The silence that followed was heavy as tombstone. David understood first, his expression becoming serene with an acceptance that broke Matthias's heart. "I need to die," said the boy simply. "No!" Matthias rose so violently that he knocked over the chair. "There must be another way. Prophecies can be interpreted in different ways." Eleazar shook his head sadly. "The Aramaic is clear, my son. The blood of life must feed the fountain of peace. David must make the supreme sacrifice to save not only Jerusalem, but all the Holy Land." David approached Matthias, his small arms wrapping around the blacksmith's waist, in an embrace that carried all the love of a father-son relationship built on choice, not on blood. "Father, if my life can bring peace to thousands of families, isn't it a small price to pay?" Matthias knelt to be at David's height, his calloused hands enveloping the boy's face. "To me, your life is worth more than the entire world. I could not live knowing I failed you." "You never failed me," David whispered, kissing Matthias's forehead with filial tenderness. "You gave me the greatest gift a man can give another, a home in the heart." Sister Miriam wept silently, while Eleazar murmured ancient prayers. But there was a determination growing in Matthias's eyes, a resolution that came from his Templar blood awakening after decades asleep. Was there really only one path to fulfill the prophecy? The decision to separate was the most difficult the small group had ever made. Sister Miriam would depart for Alexandria in search of the chalice of Miriam, guarded in a secret synagogue that had functioned for centuries as sanctuary for Jewish relics. Matthias and David would head to Antioch, where Robert, the last Templar, protected not only the 2nd fragment of the map, but also secrets that could change the entire destiny of the mission. The journey to Antioch took 5 days through landscapes that alternated between paradisiacal beauty and scars of war. David rode alongside Matthias, observing how the blacksmith seemed to grow in stature and presence as they approached his former life. The hands that knew only the hammer now wielded the sword with natural skill, as if the muscles guarded memory of decades of training. "Tell me about Robert," David asked one night when they camped under stars that shone like angels' tears. Matthias stirred the fire with a stick, his eyes lost in distant memories. "He was like a father to me when I arrived at the Order. Still a child, he taught me that a Templar's true strength doesn't come from the sword, but from the capacity to protect the weak." The blacksmith smiled sadly. "Perhaps that's why I abandoned everything, to find my own way to protect." Antioch rose like a jewel set among rocky mountains, its tall towers touching clouds that seemed to bless the ancient city. But when they reached the walls, they discovered a devastating truth. Robert had been captured by Reynald de Chatillon, a Christian knight whose ambition had corrupted his soul. "Reynald is not just a traitor," explained a young Templar who found them in a shadowy tavern. "He discovered about the chalices and wants to use their power to become Emperor of the East." Robert refused to reveal where he hid the map fragment. David felt his heart tighten. Through his expanding gifts, he could feel Robert's pain echoing through the city stones, like ghostly lament. "He's suffering," the boy murmured. "I can feel it." Matthias observed David's anguished face and made a decision that would define what kind of man and father he truly was. "We're going to save him." But destiny had other plans. While they planned the rescue, a caravan of pilgrims was attacked by bandits near the city. They were entire families, men, women, children, who traveled to Jerusalem in search of divine blessings. David looked toward the fortress where Robert was prisoner, then toward the caravan in danger. His powers could save them, but he wouldn't have enough strength to do both things on the same day. "Father," he said, placing his hand on Matthias's shoulder, "what would Robert teach me to do?" Matthias understood immediately. Robert had taught that protecting the weak came before any personal objective, however noble. With tears in his eyes, the blacksmith nodded. David galloped toward the attacked caravan, his powers exploding like rising sun. He created light barriers that protected the families, healed wounds with the touch of his hands, drove away the bandits without spilling blood. But the effort left him too exhausted to attempt rescuing Robert. When they returned to the city, they learned it was too late. Robert had been executed by Reynald, but not before hiding the map fragment and using his last moments for an action that would change everything. How could a man leave a legacy of hope even at the moment of death? The news of Robert's execution hit Matthias like hammer on incandescent anvil. The blacksmith collapsed to his knees in Antioch Square, his tears dripping onto stones that had witnessed centuries of joys and tragedies. David knelt beside him, embracing the trembling shoulders of the man who had become his entire world. "He died because of me," David whispered, his voice carrying guilt that seemed too heavy for his 12 years. "If I had chosen to save him instead of the pilgrims—" "No," said Matthias firmly, raising his tear-wet face. "You did exactly what Robert would have done. He would be proud of you." It was then they received an unexpected visit, an elderly Templar, whose white beard flowed like snow over his worn armor, approached carrying something precious. Robert's last words. "He asked me to deliver this to the young guardian," said the knight, extending a small scroll sealed with red wax, "and to do something more." David broke the seal with trembling hands. Robert's words were simple but profound. "David, the second fragment is where our faith began, in the heart that chooses to love even when it hurts. Extend your hand." The elderly Templar held David's hand between his own. "Robert taught me an ancient technique, the transfer of memories. He passed to me everything he knew so I could pass it to you." What followed was an experience that transformed David forever. Through the Templar's touch, he received not only Robert's memories but decades of Templar wisdom, knowledge about the sacred chalices, and something more precious, the deep understanding of what it meant to sacrifice oneself for others. But receiving so many memories of war, suffering and loss was devastating for David's young mind. He saw bloody crusades, destroyed families, faith being used as weapon. The boy collapsed unconscious, his body convulsing as he tried to process decades of human experiences. For 3 days, David remained between life and death, murmuring names of people he had never met, crying for losses that weren't his. Matthias didn't leave his side for a moment, singing lullabies he invented on the spot, telling forged stories to keep the boy's mind anchored in the present. "Come back to me, son," Matthias whispered, holding David's feverish hand. "The world needs you, but I need you more." When David finally opened his eyes, there was in them a new sadness, but also a wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Father," he murmured, "now I understand why Robert could die in peace. He knew he wasn't alone, that the love we plant in other hearts continues alive even when we depart." Matthias embraced David as if he could protect him from all the world's pains. "You shouldn't carry so much suffering, my son, but now I know where the second fragment is," said David, touching his own chest. "Robert hid it in the safest place he knew, in the memories of true love, and I discovered something more." David sat slowly, his eyes meeting Matthias's. "Reynald de Chatillon is your half-brother. You are sons of the same Templar Grand Master, but where you chose love, he chose ambition." The revelation struck Matthias like lightning in clear night. Memory fragments fitted together. A blonde boy who mocked him in the castle, an older half-brother who always saw him as threat. Reynold. How would a man face a brother who had chosen the path of darkness? Sister Miriam returned from Alexandria 3 days later, carrying more than just the chalice of Miriam. She brought news that would make any father's blood freeze in his veins. Her eyes, normally serene, shone with urgency and fear. Al-Hakim allied himself with Reynold, she announced before even dismounting her horse. They united corrupt Muslim and Christian forces against David, the most unlikely alliance in history, born from common ambition. David received the news with a calm that surprised everyone. Robert's memories had given him perspective on the great power games unfolding in the Holy Land. It was inevitable, he said simply. Evil always finds ways to unite when light threatens its darkness. Matthias held the chalice of Miriam with reverence. It was a piece of ancient silver, simple in appearance, but emanating an energy that made his fingers tingle. How did you get it? The rabbi of the secret synagogue recognized David through my descriptions, Miriam explained. He said he had dreamed of a green-eyed boy who would unite the 3 faiths into one family. He gave me the chalice and asked me to give this to David. She extended a small scroll. David unrolled it and found a blessing written in Hebrew, but somehow he could understand every word. May your light illuminate not only your own path, but open paths for all who have lost themselves in darkness. It was time to unite the 3 map fragments. David, Matthias and Miriam gathered in a hidden cave in the mountains near Antioch, far from curious or hostile eyes. By the light of torches that danced like liquid prayers, the fragments were placed side by side on a smooth stone. When David touched the fragments simultaneously, they fused into a single piece of parchment that glowed with its own light. The complete map revealed something that made all 3 utter exclamations of amazement. The Holy Grail was not hidden in distant catacombs or secret monasteries. "The Dome of the Rock," David whispered, tracing the golden lines that appeared on the map. "It's exactly under the most sacred and disputed place in Jerusalem." Sister Miriam nodded in recognition. "Of course, the place where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, where Solomon built the temple, where the prophet ascended to heaven, the point where the 3 faiths meet." But David had plunged into a kind of trance, his green eyes shining with visions that unfolded like celestial scrolls. "I can see," he murmured. 3 possible futures open before us. Matthias held the boy's shoulders, anchoring him in the present. "What do you see, son?" "In the first future, I managed to gather the chalices and bring eternal peace, but I die in the process, and you live the rest of your life blaming yourself for not protecting me." David paused, tears springing from his eyes. "In the second, I choose to live and flee, but war perpetuates for generations and thousands die." "And the third?" asked Miriam. Though her voice betrayed she feared the answer. David opened his eyes, and in them was a determination that transcended his age. "In the third, I find a way to save everyone, but it will require of me a sacrifice different from what the prophecy suggests." A cold wind blew through the cave, extinguishing some torches and making the remaining flames flicker like afflicted hearts. Would it be possible to break destiny's shackles and find a 4th way? Jerusalem bled under the 3rd full moon, exactly as the prophecy had predicted. The holy city had become a cauldron of despair, where 3 armies confronted each other in a mortal dance. Saladin's forces besieged the outer walls, Reynold controlled the city from within with his corrupt knights, and David moved through the shadows like a benevolent ghost. The boy had grown during the last weeks, not only in stature but in presence. At 16, he seemed to carry centuries of wisdom in the green eyes that now constantly shone with contained power. Disguised as a pilgrim, he had infiltrated the city through tunnels he had known since childhood with Matthias. Jerusalem's streets echoed with desperate prayers in 3 different languages. Christian families hid in churches, while Muslim merchants locked their shops and rabbis guided their faithful to underground synagogues. The city that should unite the 3 faiths had become a symbol of their division. David walked among them like a disguised angel, discreetly touching the sick to heal them, whispering words of hope in ears that had forgotten how to smile. His powers had evolved. Now he could feel not only physical pain, but soul pain, and there was much pain in Jerusalem. It was during one of these wanderings that the impossible happened. In a humble house near the Wailing Wall, David saw a young woman with brown hair distributing bread to orphaned children. When she turned, her eyes, the same green eyes David saw in the mirror, made him stumble in shock. Sarah? The name escaped his lips like prayer. The young woman froze. It was his sister, 3 years older, but with the same sweet face that inhabited his fragmented memories. Sarah had grown and become a woman of simple beauty and radiant kindness. David, she dropped the bread and ran to him, her arms enveloping her brother in an embrace that made time retreat. I thought you had died when the Templars took you. I survived, David whispered, feeling the familiar jasmine perfume in Sarah's hair, and I never stopped looking for you. But the joy of reunion was interrupted by a dark presence. Al-Hakim emerged from the house's shadows, his imposing figure blocking the door. Sarah moved away from David, positioning herself beside the soul hunter. David, this man saved me when our village was destroyed, said Sarah, her voice loaded with confusion and divided loyalty. He told me you had chosen to serve those who killed our family. David's heart shattered upon perceiving the manipulation. Al-Hakim had used Sarah's pain, her need to belong to something, to distance her from her brother. Sarah, I would never abandon our family. I was trying to find a way to protect everyone. Christians, Muslims, Jews. Lies, said Al-Hakim softly, but David could see tears in the soul hunter's eyes. He chose the Templars, Sarah. He chose the murderers of our people. David understood he had reached the crucial moment of his journey. It wouldn't be enough to gather the sacred chalices. First, he would need to reunite his own family torn by pain and misunderstanding, how to heal wounds that had bled for years in the heart of the one he loved most. The tension in the small house near the Wailing Wall was palpable, like thick incense. David observed Sarah and Al-Hakim, understanding that the next moments would determine not only the destiny of his mission, but the future of his soul. Sarah was torn between the brother she had lost and the protector who had saved her. Sarah, said David gently, extending his hand toward her, touch me. Use the gift our family always had, to see the truth through touch. The young woman hesitated, her eyes going from David to Al-Hakim. The soul hunter nodded slowly, in a demonstration of confidence that surprised him. When Sarah's fingers touched David's, both were flooded with shared memories. She saw everything. The moment Sir Godwin brought David to Matthias, the paternal love that flourished between the blacksmith and the boy, the nights David cried calling her name, the determination that moved him in each decision, always thinking of protecting the innocent. My God, whispered Sarah, tears streaming down her cheeks. David, I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. Al-Hakim watched the scene with tormented expression. And I used your pain to feed my own thirst for revenge. Forgive me, Sarah. It was then that war trumpets echoed throughout Jerusalem. Reynold had decided to make his final move. From the city's towers, his troops shouted proclamations, "Hand over the false prophet or the city will be burned." David went to the window, observing the flames that already began to lick the market edges. He's forcing my hand. He wants me to surrender. No, said a familiar voice at the door. Matthias entered the house, followed by Sister Miriam. The blacksmith seemed to have aged years in the last weeks, but his eyes shone with unshakable determination. No one surrenders to anything. We are a family, and families face problems together. Sarah looked at Matthias with curiosity. This is my father, said David simply. The man who taught me that love is not about blood, but about choice. Matthias approached Sarah, his calloused hands enveloping the young woman's face with paternal tenderness. And you are my daughter too, if you want to accept an old blacksmith as father. Sarah's tears were of pure joy. For years she had felt orphaned, and now she discovered she had not only a living brother, but an adoptive father whose love was greater than oceans. Al-Hakim watched the family reunion scene with melancholic expression. I should leave. My presence only brings trouble for you. No, said David firmly. You are also family. We are all children of the same pain, of the same hope. It's time to choose together. But time was running out. The flames approached and cries of terror echoed through the streets. David made a decision that would define all the rest of his life. I'll go to the Dome of the Rock alone, he said. That's where everything must end. But I won't die. I'll find a way to save everyone without sacrificing myself, because I discovered something the prophecy didn't mention. What? Asked Sister Miriam. David smiled, and in that smile was all the wisdom of his extraordinary 16 years. The true sacrifice is not giving life, it's giving pride. And I'm ready for that. What discovery would change the destiny of all those David loved? The Dome of the Rock shone under the third full moon's light, like golden jewel embedded in Jerusalem's heart. David descended the secret stairs the map had revealed, his steps echoing in chambers that hadn't seen light for centuries. The air was thick with mystery and ancient power, charged with prayers of thousands of pilgrims who had stepped on that sacred soil. The underground chambers opened like crystal cathedral. In the center, upon an altar of white stone that seemed made of solidified light, stood the three sacred chalices, the Holy Grail of Christ, simple and luminous, the chalice of Miriam, adorned with Hebrew symbols that danced like blue flames, and the chalice of Aisha, decorated with Arabic calligraphy that whispered verses from the Quran. David approached reverently, feeling the power of the three objects resonate in his soul like chords of a celestial symphony. But he wasn't alone for long. Reynald de Chatillon emerged from the shadows on the left, his Templar armor stained by ambition and corruption. Al-Hakim arrived from the right, but to David's surprise the soul hunter didn't come as enemy. There was in his eyes a different resolution, as if the family reunion had changed something fundamental in his soul. "So," said Reynald, his voice echoing through the crystal vaults, "the false prophet finally reveals where the chalices were. Now give me the power that is mine by birthright." "By birthright?" David laughed softly. "Reynald, you don't understand. Power is not taken. It's received when one is ready to carry it." Al-Hakim positioned himself beside David, surprising both the boy and Reynald. "I spent years believing power came from hatred," said the soul hunter. "But this child taught me it comes from love." Reynald unsheathed his sword, his intentions clear. "Then I'll take the chalices over your bodies." It was then that David understood the final truth about the prophecy. He approached the three chalices, extending his hands over them, but not to spill his blood, to spill his tears. Tears of forgiveness, of compassion, of unconditional love for all who suffered in the Holy Land. "The prophecy was misinterpreted for centuries," said David, his voice charged with revelation. "It's not the blood of life that must feed the fountain of peace, it's the tears of forgiveness." His tears dripped onto the three chalices simultaneously, and something miraculous happened. The three sacred objects began to shine and rise, spinning around each other in a cosmic dance. Slowly they fused into a single chalice that radiated golden, silver, and crystalline light, the Grail of Unity. Reynald attacked, but his sword dissolved into dust before touching David. The power of the Grail of Unity had created an energy field that made any act of violence impossible in that sacred space. Sarah appeared at the chamber's entrance, followed by Matthias and Sister Miriam. The young woman ran to David, embracing her brother while watching in wonder the Grail floating above their heads. "What happens now?" she asked. David looked at each person present, his chosen family and his blood family, his former enemies who had become allies. "Now I choose to give up my powers forever, sealing peace. The Grail of Unity will remain here, radiating harmony for all who come seeking healing." Would David be capable of making the supreme sacrifice, not of his life, but of his magic? Jerusalem, 5 years later. The sound of hammer on anvil echoed through the workshop like ancestral music, a melody that connected David to the man who had been his father in all senses that mattered. The hands that once radiated divine light now shaped common iron with learned skill and inherited love. David had become the blacksmith Matthias had always been, a simple man who found the sacred in the everyday, who saw miracles in the transformation of raw metal into useful tools. At 21, he carried on his shoulders not the weight of cosmic destinies, but the quiet satisfaction of one who had chosen humanity over divinity. Sarah entered the workshop carrying a tray with hot bread and sweet wine, her rounded belly revealing the new life growing within her. She had married a young Jewish doctor who worked in a clinic where Christians, Muslims, and Jews were treated side by side, without distinction of faith. "How's the work?" she asked, kissing her brother's forehead with fraternal affection. "Reinald ordered a gate for his house garden," David replied with a smile. Who would have thought that one day he would plant flowers instead of sowing war? Reynald's transformation had been one of the most unexpected miracles of recent years. After the Grail of Unity permanently installed itself under the Dome of the Rock, radiating peace throughout Jerusalem, the former corrupt knight had gradually rediscovered his humanity. Now he directed an orphanage where children of the three faiths played together, learning that differences were bridges, not walls. Al-Hakim appeared at the workshop door, carrying a special gift, a carved wooden cradle he had made for Sarah's baby. The former soul hunter had become a carpenter, his hands that once wielded swords now created furniture for families beginning to dream of peaceful futures. "For my nephew or niece," he said, placing the cradle in the workshop corner, "may this child grow in a world where they don't need to choose between loving and surviving." Sister Miriam arrived shortly after, but not alone. In recent years, she had left religious vows to marry Matthias, discovering that human love was as sacred as any divine devotion. She carried in her hands a small package that made David smile before even opening it. "A letter arrived," she announced, "from Rome. The Pope wants to know if there really exists a place in Jerusalem where the three faiths live in harmony." David laughed, his laughter echoing through the workshop like bronze bells. "Tell him to come see for himself, but to bring an open heart. It's the only passport that's worth anything here." Matthias entered carrying wood for the forge, his hair now completely white but his eyes still shining with the same paternal tenderness as always. At 60, he had found a happiness he had never dreamed possible, a family united by choice, grandchildren on the way, and the certainty that the son he had raised had changed the world, not through magic, but through love. "David," he said, lighting the fire with familiar gestures, "do you regret it, choosing this life instead of the other?" David paused in his work, looking through the workshop window. Outside, Arab merchants negotiated with Jewish artisans while Christian children played nearby. Mixed couples walked hand in hand through streets where before only suspicion and fear were seen. The dome of the rock shone in the distance, no longer as a symbol of division, but as a beacon of union. "Father," said David, embracing Matthias with all the gratitude of one who had found his true home, "I discovered that the greatest miracle is not turning water into wine, but turning hatred into love. And for that, we don't need magical powers. We just need to choose every day to be human." Sarah approached, placing her hand on her belly. "What if my child is born with special gifts?" David smiled, gently touching his sister's belly. "Then we'll teach him that true power lies not in what we can do, but in what we choose not to do. And that family is not about sacred blood, but about hearts that choose to love." The sun set over Jerusalem, painting the sky with colors that knew no religious borders. In the workshop of a simple blacksmith who had once carried the world's destiny in his hands, a family gathered for dinner, proving that the most lasting miracles are those woven with threads of everyday love. David looked one last time through the window, whispering a prayer of gratitude. He had traded divine powers for human joys and had never felt richer. The true miracle was not in the sacred blood, but in the heart that chose to love.